Okay, that kind of concludes the first part of the class. Do I have any questions from the group? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so I think what we'll do is let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll crush through the last half of this class. So if you would, feel free to take a break, and then when you get back, make sure you put your webcam on so I can see you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, I'm back.
Got the class puppy.
Maybe bring your dog to class night.
That's right.
Oh yeah. See if I can get badass Floyd off the ground. Oh.
All right, if you guys can start turning on your webcam. Oh, look at you, buddy.
Another reason to stay in shape so you can lift your fat ass dog off the
That's
ground.
right.
Oh, sorry, bud.
Gosh, come here. All right, come on.
Oh yeah, I know the feeling. You get like that too, you know.
All right, if you can let us know you're back by turning your webcam on or speak up if you don't have one.
This is Scott, I'm back.
Hi.
Colin is back.
Hi, Colin.
Hello.
I think that's everyone. Okay, Chief Bondis put up in the comments the links to Lieutenant Ray McCormack's keynote speech. He put up a link to the Atlanta fire captain who was suspended due to the rescue. And he put up the link to report from Engine Company 82. Thank you for doing that. Also, from the notes here, Mr. Johnny May would like to let everyone know that if you would like to contact him for some health and wellness or injury consultation, free plug, go ahead and do so. He is attendee number 4 if you don't have his name. While we're taking the break here, does anyone, I know that was a lot to throw at you guys. As you can tell, I'm pretty geeky when it comes to fire service history. Anyone got any thoughts or input on anything we've talked about? Okay, not hearing any. Tough crowd tonight. That's okay. All right, we'll get back into our presentation. Unfortunately, IFSTA does not have a very good instructor methodology, so the class is not in the same style. But before we get started, I thought it would be appropriate to put up a contemporary meme for all of you to enjoy. Oh. Real big fan of Tiger King. I'm sure most of you are. And I'm sure all of you are looking forward to your stimulus checks, which should be coming in the next week. So I thought this would be very fitting for today. All right, we'll get started. This is getting more into page 16 and 17 of your book, and hopefully this will wind us right on down to 8:30. We might be 5 minutes or so after. I'll do my best to keep us on track. So again, if you see asterisks, those are all questions that you're going to see on the test. An example there is they may ask you which NFPA standard surrounds firefighter safety, in this case NFPA 1500. We're not asking you to memorize NFPA 1500 because it would be impossible. Chief Bondis will tell you that, but that's just how the questions go. Okay, so we're going to talk about the general trends and change in the modern fire service, and I'll kind of dovetail back into some of what we talked about earlier. So as we mentioned, the 1980s really saw an increase of fire prevention and public safety and education, which saw a decrease in fire and fire duty throughout the United States. Along with that, with the National Firefighters Association, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and some other different organizations, firefighter safety became a very forefront conversation, which, as we talked about, at times can lead to some dichotomy of what we're expected to do. The majority of the standards that we look at for firefighter safety, things like getting annual or biannual or sometimes every 3-year fitness and health screenings, DOT physicals, cancer mitigation, can all be found in NFPA 1500, which is oftentimes where the training division, as well as in our department, Chief Bondis spends a lot of his time. Also with that, after World War II and Vietnam, we saw an increase in the fire department needing to modernize as a corporation. It's very common in administrative offices to refer to the fire department as a business. And although we're not in the business of making money, we're in the business of staying open and being financially solvent as well as successful. And part of that includes emergency medical services. So for instance, Timberline Fire, we're a BLS, Basic Life Support Agency. We support first responders as well as EMTs, although we don't transport our own individuals. An example like Chief Onder, who also works at West Metro, is an example of an ALS fire department who has basic life support EMTs on the engines, and then paramedics that ride on the ambulances, and they do their own transport. NFPA 472, for the purpose of your test, we're talking about hazardous materials. However, and this is a big however with a capital H, depending on what happens with COVID-19 and the DFPC who issues your state testing, if for some odd chance we go down the road of you having to take the new updated test, which we hope doesn't happen, the test would actually require you to know that NFPA 1072 is the updated national standard for hazardous materials. So I'll ask you to memorize both 472 and 1072 as the NFPA standard for hazmat. In addition to that, after 9/11, it changed a lot of our views on terrorism as well as weapons of mass destruction. And so hazmat, along with HAZWOPER and WMD identification and hazard mitigation really became common. As we're getting further away from 9/11, it's not at the forefront as it used to be, but we do still spend a good amount of time on that throughout our training cycle. Natural disasters, most recent and most significant was Hurricane Katrina. As we know, that displaced 3 million people. It really jump-started our need for special operations and natural disaster planning. And we get a lot of that in the form of ICS 300 and 400, which are now FEMA ran 2- and 3-day classes that spend a lot of time talking about natural disaster. Colin Jones, being part of the DFPC, could tell you a lot about that, especially in wildland. ICS 3 and 400 are pretty significant in the ICS structure. Professionalization of the fire service. Going back to the idea of smoking stogies in the back of a fire truck is not who the fire service is anymore. More and more, the fire service is expecting members to maintain a lot of licensure and certification. And as you trend more towards the upper ranks or at larger, more affluent agencies, they're expecting you to have associates and bachelor's degrees as a standard, and oftentimes master's and sometimes doctoral degrees for the higher level of leadership. Along with that is our compensation. As we increase in our compensation in the fire service, it is appropriate to expect that the community would hope we would have fairly good educations to be making 6 figures as firefighters. And I will tell you, there are many organizations in our state who pay backstep firefighters of 10 years over 100 grand to work. It's mind-blowing to think about that. Although I am very enriched and true to my position as a blue-collar employee of the fire service, it's also time to recognize as you mature, we expect you to kind of further your education as best as possible. And then finally, community-based fire protection. The modern term for that is CRR, community risk reduction. That's really a holistic approach to education, from everything from social media to YouTube to adult-based learning to childhood learning, and really the fire service being a part of everyone's home life as well as scholastic life, and then really kind of keeping up on making sure you see us just enough to remember to maintain fire safety throughout your daily life. influences in the organization, culture, organizational characteristics, and cultural challenges. I'm not going to get a whole lot into that because we basically beat that to death in our earlier PowerPoint, but just understand that culture is very, very important to the fire service. In fact, culture can sometimes be so important that it hampers our growth. And so we're doing our best to educate our members on where you pay attention to culture and where you choose to put that book down and move on from some of the old and archaic techniques and ideals that we had. We talked about the paramilitary structure. We use ranks, uniforms, teamwork, as well as chain of command to kind of keep that level of structure in our organization, especially in high risk areas and kind of austere environments like fighting a fire. And then cultural challenges can be everything from the base of membership we have, including ethnicity, affluency, the region inside the United States, as well as the base of people we serve, along with those same kind of precursors of who they are they affluent, are they poverty stricken, do they have a lot of health issues, are they fairly healthy, etc. Fire service obviously requires a lot of cultural strengths. We really look towards integrity, character, work ethic, pride, all of the things that you guys know about. Those are really kind of the major pillars of what we expect our members to hold on to. And we truly expect members of the U.S. Fire Service to be the upstanding role models in the United States. This is a really important slide to me. The mission of the fire service. I'm a huge believer of life safety as our primary mission. I try my best on a foot-long measuring stick to stay at the 6-inch mark on the argument of culture of suppression versus culture of safety. But if I'm being honest with you, if the suppression culture was 12 inches, I would tend to lean more towards the 7-inch mark. I think it's really important that remember, if we take the oath to become firefighters and we're investing our time in attending academy, we have to remember the primary reason we are doing this is to protect lives and save lives and protect property and the environment. Those are kind of the two most iconic mission sets of the United States Fire Service. There's also a third one, which is, it can be said several different ways, but the most common way to say it is stabilizing the hazard or minimizing the hazard. So you could look at that as three or a trifold of mission: saving lives, minimizing or mitigating the hazard, and then protecting property and environment. This is a good kind of just image to look at, going back to that military structure. If you look at it in like an X and Y axis, the most common rank that you have at the fire department and the largest ranks, if you will, is the firefighter. And as you move up in rank and seniority, that decreases the amount of people in the fire department. At Timberline Fire, we do have firefighters and EMTs. We do not have a promoted position of driver operator at this time. We do have both shift lieutenants who are paid, as well as station lieutenants who are volunteers. You know that we have a captain, Captain Johnson, who's the training officer for the organization. We kind of skip the battalion chief role, and then we have assistant chiefs, Chief Kepke, Chief Szymanski. Deputy chief would be someone like Chief Bondus, and then obviously the fire chief is Chief Paul Under. So that's just an example of kind of how our structure is laid out. If you go to our policies and procedures, we also have the organizational chart, which kind of lays out in the ICS structure, which will be a later chapter, how all of those positions kind of lay in the tree of the family, if you will. There's several different types of fire departments within the United States. It's important to recognize that. What we talked about earlier is public versus private. But how we actually need to think of this is municipal. If I spelled that right. Thank God I got word spell check. There we go. We got municipal, we have private, and then we have special districts. So Timberline Fire is a special district. Municipal fire departments are like the Denver Fire Department, the Fire Department of New York, San Diego Fire Department, the Fire Department of St. Louis, etc. They're organized, ran, and officiated by the town or the city. So the city manager or the mayor, depending on the state or local authority, are truly the big boss, if you will, and the governing boss of the fire department. Some volunteer fire departments do fall under municipal authority. However, in Colorado, that is not the standard. In fact, nearly all volunteer fire departments within our state are special districts, which I'll talk about in a moment. Private fire departments are fairly common in rural areas. Sometimes they can be contract private fire departments where it's kind of like a subscription. And some of those subscriptions can actually be as cheap as like $50 annually. So if you live in Louisiana in the deep south, you may pay $50 per household to the fire department to have a contract for service. Other examples of private fire departments can be something like the Jim Beam Fire Department. Yes, the Jim Beam, like the bourbon you drink. They're a contracted or internal fire department that actually operates under the corporation, and they pay private firefighters to staff engines for their locales or business entities. This is also common with a lot of aerospace where they'll actually have on-scene ARF fire departments that are privately owned and operated. And then finally is special districts. And this is what Timberline Fire and the majority of districts within the state of Colorado are. Special districts in its most basic nutshell is what we call a quasi-governmental entity. As you guys can tell, I'm not very educated in being able to write. Quasi-governmental entities. So like at Timberline, we have 5 board members that's chaired by a board president. There's typically a secretary. There's typically a financial member. It has different names depending on the board. And then we have what we call directors. And they're the 5 members who make up all the governmental decisions. And they have a direct report to the fire chief. So unlike a municipality or a private fire department, a special district only has 1 employee that they directly report to, which is Chief Onder. Chief Onder then carries out the authorities of that quasi-governmental board and employs his members and employees as he sees fit. The special districts board is elected by the town or by the constituents of the region they represent. So in a way, we're an elected organization run by a political governing body, if you will. The way a municipality collects its funds is through sales tax, and typically, well, I won't get too far into it, but basically sales tax. So if you go to the city of Denver and buy a soda, you may pay 4 cents for that soda, and that 4 cents directly goes to the fire department. Private organizations are what you would assume. The capital or the operating capital by the company pays for the operation of the fire department. Special districts, however, are slightly different. The way special districts work is on its most basic level, you pay a property tax to the county or to the region of the special district, and a portion of that property tax is basically used as the funds or the revenue for the organization. So if you live in Gilpin County or a district that has a special district, part of your property taxes pays for the operation of the fire department. As you guys know, there's several different types of fire departments out there: career, volunteer, or on-call in combination. Our organization officially is a combination because we have paid members as well as volunteers, and most of the rural fire departments throughout the nation are volunteer, and a lot of the suburban agencies are combination. Although we're fairly rural in the sense of our region, we do have 7,000 people who live around us, and we have a fairly significant call load compared to the immediate areas around us. Hence the necessitation for having paid members who can operate 24/7. And even my organization I work at full time, we serve a population of around 60,000 people, run about 5,000 calls, and we're a combination agency as well. So it just kind of depends on the needs of the community and your call volume. Two different types of people in the fire service. We have line personnel, oftentimes referred to as sworn or operations, and then we have staff personnel, typically referred to as admin. You can see here line personnel are going to be your firefighters. Sometimes your training division will fall inside of line staff or operations, and other times, and for the purposes of your test, training officers fall inside of the staff personnel. Your staff personnel at Timberline Fire are people like Chief Paul Onder, Chief Szymanski, the business manager, Miss Jennifer, as well as Ward, who's the maintenance officer. So it just kind of depends on how the department's structured, but I'd encourage you to read the exact definitions in the book, as there will be questions specific to this slide moving forward. We have kind of global terms that we refer to in the fire service. So when you hear Chief Bondis or myself or Captain Johnson say the fire company or the engine company, we're referring to the lowest organic structure in the fire service, which is that 3 or 4 man engine. So an example would be if you shift at Station 5 and you're part of Engine 55, you're part of a fire company, or you're part of Engine 55's company, if you will. A battalion or district is basically a massing of multiple companies. So at Timberline, basically our North District all the way to Station 4 is referred to as our North District, and from Station 5 South is referred to as our South District. And that's really just a way to manage the area geographically, as well as what we call span of control, or one's ability to manage multiple people at one time. And in the fire service, that's typically 3 to 5 units, and sometimes 7. And then our operations division, like I talked about earlier, they kind of manage the day in and day out daily functions. So although Chief Szymanski would be part of the admin staff, he does manage the operations division. Here's just an example of terms we call different apparatus. Engine company is what our department services with. We have 4 engine companies, and then technically we have 2 tender or tender engine companies as well. A ladder company we don't service, but a lot of fire departments do. Typically the minimum length of a ladder is 75 feet, and the maximum length currently being produced in the United States is 105 feet. And those typically reach to about the 5th or 7th floor, sometimes to the 8th floor of high-rise buildings. Rescue companies or squad companies can do specialized assignments like extrication, technical rescue, rope rescue, sometimes hazmat. It just depends on the makeup of the organization and what they refer to that company as. And then brush companies. I know for Colin, we don't refer to a Type 6 engine, which is basically it's like a large pickup truck built on crack that has a large tank. We don't refer to that in our area as a brush company. We just call it a Type 6. But if you get into more metropolitan areas, they would refer to it as a brush company. Hazmat, emergency medical, which can sometimes be referred to as a medic unit. And even on the East Coast, they're sometimes referred to actually as rescues, which can be kind of confusing. ARF, and then finally special rescue companies. And those are, in a way, it says special. Like if you go to New York City, they have 3 rescue companies for the entire city. So those guys are slammed day in, day out, getting their butts handed to them. They're kind of the special forces do-all guys. They run structure fires. They're rescuing people off the top floors that are on window cleaning, ballast that, you know, kind of slide off the side of the building, and now they're just laying there waiting for somebody to rescue them. They're the ones that are doing dive rescue and underwater or surface operations. So they're kind of the do-all guys and gals. As we talked about earlier, NFPA kind of directs how we educate you guys and the standards to which that you need to be certified to. The big NFPA to be looking for here is 1001, and that's the NFPA standard on firefighter duties and assignments, as well as the basic training, if you will. Inside NFPA 1001, it kind of gives us all the parameters to which we look at for professional development, education, and kind of some of that training, the basic training. Things like age, medical, and job-related physical fitness are pulled out of that NFPA 1500 that we talked about earlier, which is really talking about health and wellness. There's that NFPA for you with an asterisk. Firefighter 2 in the structural world is the more senior certification. So all of you will leave the fire academy with Firefighter 1, and then sometime later you will be able to qualify and test for Firefighter 2. In the wildland community, it's actually opposite. In the wildland community, Firefighter Type 2 is the lowest level of firefighter, and Firefighter Type 1 is the highest level. The wildland guys, for some reason, have it backwards because the structure guys do it right. Here's just a couple other examples. Air Force firefighters, sometimes referred to as ARF, falls under NFPA 1003. And then that hazmat tech, again, you're seeing the two standards there. The long and short is if you take it before July, God willing, you'll be following NFPA. That's, I think that's wrong. It should be 472, not 427. So 472. And if you take the test after July, it will be NFPA 1072 because they've updated the standard. Wildland firefighters, fire department safety officers, fire police. Fire police is a kind of an archaic term. It's not really used anymore. We've already talked about really the different levels of officers. We've got company officers, which in our case is like the lieutenants that are paid, district chiefs and battalion chiefs like Chief Szymanski, Chief Kepke, all the way through the fire chief. We have different levels of emergency medical care at our district. To be on the fire department, we require you at minimum to have basically your CPR and first aid certification, but in short time, we kind of ask of you to get your emergency medical response certification, which is the lowest national registered standard of care that we can offer. But the ideal location, and especially if you want to be at some point a paid or career firefighter, would to be an emergency medical technician basic or EMTB. And then depending on your organization, some organizations will allow you to all the way function up to a paramedic, which is the highest pre-hospital level of care that the nation authorizes.